So good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today for our latest Irish Cancer Society research webinar, which today is entitled Cancer Clinical Trials, the Cornerstone of Cancer Treatment. Over the last few decades, the huge research strides in our understanding of many forms of cancer have translated to improvements in the numbers now surviving the various different forms of cancer. All of these advances are built on the back of clinical research, where theories are examined in real people to see if they work and how well they might work. This well-structured investigation in people is called a clinical trial, and it is the very cornerstone of advances in all forms of disease treatment, but none more so, I think, than cancer. The support of the public allows the Irish Cancer Society to be the largest non-state funder of clinical trial research in the country, and that support is allowing us to not just fund trials, but also the amazingly passionate and talented people who make this research possible in our country. Tomorrow is International Clinical Trials Day, so we thought it would be fitting that we get a world expert in clinical trials research and a passionate world expert, I have to say, in clinical trial research to help explain to us what trials are, where they come from, and give us maybe a snapshot of some of the activity taking place in Cork and indeed in the wider community all across the country. It's therefore a very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dervla Collins, and I'll just talk a little bit about Dervla just before we kick in and she gives us her great webinar. Dr. Dervla Collins, PhD, is a consultant medical oncologist in Cork University Hospital and University College Cork Senior Lecturer in Cancer Research. She's a medical doctor, obviously, but she also holds a scientific doctorate in cancer research. She has a subspecialty interest in gynecological and lung cancer, as well as translational research, which I think she'll mention today, and early phase clinical trials, following both her work in her PhD and fellowship at the Drug Development Unit in the Royal Marsden Hospital. She's the co-chair of Cancer Trials Ireland, the Gynecological Trials Group in Cancer Trials Ireland. She's the Cancer Trials Ireland representative in the European Network of Gynecological Oncology Trials, and chair of the Cancer Trials Ireland National Molecular Tumour Board, which is forming around now. She leads a number of gynecological and lung cancer trials in Ireland, including a trial she developed herself in immunotherapy and small cell lung cancer. And she was last year was the recipient of the Irish Cancer Society Clinician Research Leadership Award, which aims to support her translational and research passions. And just before I kick off, just before Dervla kicks off, a couple of just basic housekeeping points as well. We are recording this event. We will make it available at some stage afterwards. Dr. Collins loves to answer questions, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, which you should see down the bottom of your screen there. So we'd really appreciate any comments or questions in there. The talk is not intended to give specific medical advice, and we therefore encourage people to bring any specific questions specific to their own health and cancer treatment up with their cancer team. I want to say a big word of thanks to the team that made the talk happen today, especially Dr. Rebecca Ammett in the background there. Thanks for all you've done. And finally, if you've any general questions about cancer, and Dervla will mention this, our support line is always available. She'll give the number later on, but also through our Daffodil Centres or our website, cancer.ie. So without further ado from me, I want to pass over and really very grateful to our speaker today, to Dr. Dervla Collins, joining all the way from Cork.
Thanks very much, Robert. Thank you. So again, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. It's obviously a really important day tomorrow, International Clinical Trials Day, for raising awareness of clinical trials, which are, as the title of my talk is, the cornerstone of cancer treatment and cancer care. So I'm just going to share my screen and just confirm that people can see that before I launch.
See it fine, yeah.
Great, thank you. So Rob has very kindly given an introduction to me and who I am, and as he said, I'm all the way down in Cork, which isn't that far, and Ireland is, as they call it, I suppose it's very small on the scheme of things from a country. And actually, one of the reasons why clinical trials can work really well in Ireland because traveling from one centre to another is not that onerous. So obviously I did a lot of research in the Royal Marsden Hospital, a lot of trial work, and in America it's sort of standard of care sometimes to travel hours and get on planes to travel to units for certain trials. So Ireland has the advantage of everything being relatively within driving distance. So as Rob has said, I'm a consultant medical oncologist and CUH. I also cover University Hospital Kerry and do a cancer clinic there, so that the whole sort of Cork Kerry region is covered sort of under the same trials group. Besides my training in Ireland as medical oncologist, which feels like another lifetime ago, I did my advanced fellowship in the Royal Marsden Hospital in a very specialized early phase clinical trials unit. So we did very early phase trials, phase 1, phase 2, often with first in humans. So drugs that are being used for the very first time in humans, and these are delivered in very specialized units. Ireland doesn't have a unit like that. Probably doesn't need a unit like that. We have phase 1 studies, but for the very beginning ones, I suppose it requires very specific expertise. I am also supported by the Irish Cancer Society with the Clinician Research Leadership Award in my, I suppose, passion and pursuit of clinical trials. And the Irish Cancer Society has very kindly supported me with 2 days a week to focus just on clinical trials and developing, as Robert said, some of my own studies. So we're very grateful for that, and this is essential as we build the Irish clinical trial, I suppose, expertise. This sort of support is essential. With Cancer Trials Ireland, I'm a joint co-chair of the gynecological cancer trials, so that's cervical, womb and ovarian, and I'm also most recently the chair of the Irish Molecular Tumour Board, which will hopefully platform to more targeted or precision medicine trials, which are important in rare tumours. I'm also a principal investigator with cancer research at UCC and a principal investigator with multiple international industry studies, predominantly gynecological cancers and lung cancer. And then I also have my own investigator-initiated studies and collaborate with other colleagues who have the same. So I'm going to go back to basics and talk about what is a cancer clinical trial. And I suppose the nutshell, and this little green picture is meant to be a nut in the grass, is how can I be sure, or how can any oncologist be sure that any new cancer treatment or intervention help my patients live better or live longer? And that's the key. How do I know that what I give is the best treatment for these patients? And clinical trials are a really important part of that. So a clinical trial will answer, does a cancer treatment work at all? Like, is it any good? Does it have side effects, and is it safe to give to patients? Does it have any toxicities that may make it make it a drug that causes too much fatigue that you just can't have a quality of life on it, or actually is it really well tolerated? So we need cancer clinical trials to prove that. Then we need the later stage trials. Does it work better than what we currently give? Is it better than our what we call gold standard? And we can quantify how impactful is this new treatment? How much of I suppose of an effect does it have on our patients? And one of the really important parts of how we make this decision using clinical trials comes down to this pyramid. And this is I suppose the most important trials or other that occur that we can rely on. So the higher up you go on the pyramid, the more reliable the information is. So at the very top, we have clinical guidelines, which all your oncologists and anyone who's practicing any sort of medicine should be using to guide their treatments. Systematic reviews or meta-analysis look at multiple randomized controlled trials or cohort studies, pool them all together using very advanced statistical designs to make bigger populations to make decisions. But when we come to the primary studies, so the primary clinical trials, the randomized control trial and the cohort studies are really the key. Anything down the line here, retrospective studies that look back and I say, 10 years ago, we gave this treatment to a couple of patients and this is how they did compared to someone else. That isn't that reliable from an evidence-based. I would still need to prove that in an RCT. Case series, 20 patients did well, not that reliable. because it's just not a big enough number. Editorials, and then there's a lot of background research in laboratory and animal work, which often doesn't translate into humans. So it's important that the evidence behind the treatments is good. A randomized control trial, most of you may know, it's where we basically, this is at its simplest design, we will split two groups of patients at the same time who are of what we call matched, or they've similar diagnosis, they've kind of similar background histories, and we put them into two groups, and one group will get the new treatment or the investigational arm, and the other group would get what we would give anyway. They won't get no treatment, they would give the standard care. Now, if the standard of care is no treatment, then that would be what it is, but most of the time standard of care is just our current practice, so a chemotherapy agent or something along those lines. And at the end of the day, so at this outcome here, we have two groups that we can compare, in as pure a sense as we can, to see if one is better than the other. There are lots of different clinical trials. We call them phases. They go from phase 1. I mentioned I worked in a phase 1 unit, but as the trial moves along into more advanced phases, we get into the phase 3, which are more likely the randomized clinical trials. It is worth pointing out that, and this is what the numbers are, that there's less patients on the earlier phase studies than is needed for the later phase studies. And importantly as well, there's a lot of drugs at this point tested at these preclinical phase 1 and phase 2 studies that are proven at this point not to be good enough, not to be safe enough, not to be, better than what we have. And therefore, when it comes to, so let's say we start out with, 20 drugs, maybe only one of them, maybe not even one of them, start out with 50 drugs, maybe only one of those will actually get into a proper phase study where we're looking to see, or a phase 3 study where we're looking to see if it's better than current practice. So there's a lot of work goes into these trials and takes a long time. And I suppose just the importance of that is it cannot be emphasized enough. So cancer clinical trials are not a modern thing; they're not a new thing. And I'm going to just briefly touch on a little bit of history, because I don't know if but the first written evidence of a clinical trial is actually found in the Bible. It's found in the book of Daniel. And I don't know if you remember from the Bible, but Daniel was taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar, and he was obviously Jewish, and they believed in a kosher diet. And King Nebuchadnezzar wanted him trained up, and Daniel and his friends trained up into the Babylonian ways. So he basically said, let them eat what the Babylonians eat. Let them eat meat and wine and be healthy, because meat and wine they believed made you healthy. But obviously that was not a kosher diet. So Daniel said, no, we're not eating meat and wine. We're going to eat what we normally did. And there was a lot of kind of pushback on this. And Daniel said, listen, and I'm ad-libbing here. Daniel said, give me 10 days. Give me beans and water and my friends for 10 days. And if at the end of those 10 days, I look less healthy, or I don't have, I don't have the same as my Babylonian colleagues, then I will eat your meat and your wine. And so that study took place. It was a prospective study technically. It wasn't randomized, but at the end of the 10 days, after eating beans and water, Daniel was obviously in perfect health, and so they were allowed to continue on their kosher diet. So the first, I suppose, recognized modern clinical trial was 1747, and it was on the 20th of May, which is tomorrow, and recognized as International Clinical Trials Day. And scurvy at this time was a big issue. And interesting, there was about 2 million people over the 200 years or so that scurvy, because it took about 200 years for them to figure out how to treat scurvy and what was causing it actually, which is, on hindsight, when you think of modern medicine, is incredible. So scurvy, it killed so many sailors and Navy officers. And it was kind of, something that they described as inexplicable. They didn't know how it was happening, terrible and capricious, and really quite a horrible disease that we just obviously don't see anymore. So on the British naval vessel, the Salisbury, Dr. James Lind was the naval surgeon, and he decided, he was seeing this, and he started to see it in his in the sailors of the ship, and he said, okay, we're going to try something new here. So on the 20th of May, he took 12 sailors that he knew had scurvy, and he writes that their cases were similar as I could have them. They all had all the blackened putrid gums, spots and lassitude, which is tiredness, with weakness of the knees. So he took these 12 sailors and he put them into the same cabin and gave them the same food. This is important even now for clinical trials, that everything is kind of kept the same except for the investigational agents. And he divided them into 6 groups of pairs, and they all got different, did these things. So one pair got a quart of cider a day. One pair got 25 drops of this elixir vitriol, which was kind of a weak acid, hydrochloric acid. 2 got 2 spoonfuls of vinegar 3 times a day. Sounds like something Mary Poppins would do. Pint of seawater, a lectuary, which was kind of a spicy nutmeg sort of thing. And then a pair got 2 oranges and 1 lemon a day. And this was given daily for 6 days. And no surprises now, but obviously then none of this had been shown before. The pair who got the 2 oranges and lemon, by the end of the 6 days, were feeling so well that they were able to actually help look after the other groups. And this is what we now call a controlled multi-arm trial, albeit a small group. But this was published, and it basically led to the treatment of scurvy, and all naval vessels then gave their sailors citrus fruits. So modern era clinical trials obviously are the foundation for current cancer treatments. What I prescribe now, it is because of cancer clinical trials that have gone before. And it is critical for the future cancer treatments and to make cancer treatments better, to help patients live longer, to achieve better cure. There's a huge priority over the years into safety and quality of life compared to maybe older studies. And that's the paramount, that patients who go on to clinical trials are kept safe, and that and there's a lot of safeguards in place to do that. It does increase our access to new drugs and agents that might benefit our patients, and also more other aspects of it. Is it cost effective? The drugs are expensive, so we need to pay off, or we need to sort of balance out the benefit of the drug versus the impact of the cost. And it is really, especially randomized controlled trials are the only true way to confirm efficacy. There are a couple of misconceptions. People think placebo is no treatment. Placebo is standard of care. So if we're comparing to placebo, that's what you were going to get anyway. We do create sometimes placebo pills or placebo drips, and that's when we're comparing it, because we like to have the trials blinded, so that you don't know who's in what group, because otherwise you'd be biased, and you could treat one group differently, or a patient who knew they were getting the drug may kind of naturally feel better, and someone who didn't think they were getting the drug may naturally feel worse, just because they know they're not getting something. So the placebo is an important aspect, but it shouldn't be considered that you're not getting a treatment. Sometimes people think that, a clinical trial is that they use people as guinea pigs to sort of test out drugs for the first time. And while first in human studies exist, they are in very specialized units. And certainly there is decades of research has already gone into these drugs, usually in animals and laboratory work. And they're so safe the way they're sort of developed, that really the guinea pig aspect is not an issue. Some people think that trials means that there's no more treatment options for them. Oh, I have nothing. My doctor says he's nothing to give me, therefore I'll think of a trial. Actually, trials now are predominantly given early in cancer, sometimes even the first treatment, because we're trying to improve cure rates and survival. And we know that sometimes giving these drugs earlier rather than later is important. That's not to say that there aren't drugs also tested in very later line settings, but just it's not the trials are not just for the end. Some people think they're expensive, and they're not. I mean, it's expensive to run a study, but it's not for the patient involved. And often they might be subsidizing for travel costs and sometimes overnight stays if you have to be in at like 7:30 in the morning for a blood test. So there might be some subsidies available to that. We're trying to make sure that it's not just people in Dublin, Cork, Galway, Limerick, Waterford who are next to trials units that get access to trials units. We want to make sure that people who are in, Dingle or in Sligo or, in multiple places around the country, they can also access clinical trials. Some people believe that you're locked in, you sign a consent form, that's it, you can't get out. It's the most voluntary. I've had people drop out the day before they were meant to go in, drop out on the middle of the study. You could drop out at any time point, and actually that has no impact on your care, your cancer care moving forward. It doesn't impact it at all. So it's very much up to you. You make your decision at the time. And then some people don't like meeting a new team, a new hospital. They have relationships made with their own cancer nurses. But that shouldn't be lost. You shouldn't lose contact with your cancer nurses just because now you're on a clinical trial in another unit. You sort of develop another layer of support in some respects, another team to help you through this. But you would still be linked with your own oncologist. So I have patients who actually go to Dublin for clinical trials, and I still see them. Now, I often don't drag them in to see me, but I'll ring them up every couple of months and say, how are you doing? Just out of, to keep in the link, keep interest. And I think that that's an important part as well. So there's lots of information, but ask your doctor and keep asking. There is a Cancer Trials Ireland website, which does show the open studies, but your doctors have to know, or your oncologist in particular, what might be coming. So I lead out on the gynae cancer trials in Ireland. So actually, I know that there's these studies coming and opening in different sites. I also know if a study is open in James's, but not open in Cork. And that information is really kind of important as well to discuss. As you're planning a treatment, you might say, look, there is this study coming. It might really suit you. So let's maybe start a different treatment than maybe we'd have originally planned, to see if, if we buy some time until the study opens, which, maybe. And that's a conversation you have with your oncologist, but it should be part of those conversations. There's lots of support groups, social media, maybe on social media and other aspects that may have information about trials that are open or other people have access studies. And there's obviously the Irish Cancer Society Cancer Nurse line, which is a free phone line that can also help guide you in giving information. So if you go into the cancertrials.ie open trials section, and it's www.cancertrials.ie, you kind of get open to this page, and you can, it's categorized according to the cancer itself, and you can click into it and see if something's suitable for you. But as I said, it doesn't show studies that are coming, and not all clinical trials go through Cancer Trials Ireland. That's the other point. There are other trials open outside of Cancer Trials Ireland for a variety of reasons. So that's why your oncologist conversation is important. The cancer clinical trial groups, they're scattered around the country, but this comes back to a point I made earlier. Ireland is very accessible from get in your car. I know we don't always have the greatest public transport, but certainly from driving from Galway to Cork, it's not the worst journey. And clinical trials that are open in Cork are available to you wherever you're from. And I think that referrals between the different hospitals and actually within the different units are important, because I may open a study before Galway does, but the patient is ready to be treated now, and therefore they might come to me instead of staying in Galway. There's also, the clinical trials unit offer enhanced support services. They're usually linked to patient public involvement groups, which are there's hubs now around the country where patients get involved, and the public get involved and have input into the clinical trials networks. The clinical trial teams are now, and units are now linked to the university colleges. And the important thing I said about the equity of access. So this is now, and this is happening all over the country, but obviously I'm down here in the south. So we now have the UCC Cancer Trials Group, which links Waterford, the Bonds Hospital in Cork trial unit, and CUH clinical trial unit, but we all work under the same umbrella, and we all communicate, and we're all talking, and we all can sort of make decisions on each other's trials as well, which is important. So getting to a clinical trial, it's important that there's a lot of research gone in beforehand. And some of that it depends on translational research. And translational research is a really important part of cancer care and clinical trials. So translational research sort of sits in between basic scientific research and clinical, and the clinical trial, where you're taking the new treatment and trying it. And it often tries to answer certain questions that I'm going to touch on. So this is kind of where I sit, and I really have a huge passion for. And one of the ways that I'm able to do this is because of the support of the Irish Cancer Society, which has supported this Clinician Research Leadership Award. And I'm one of, there's been, I think, you might tell me, Ron, about 8 maybe Clinician Research Leadership Award given out over the years, and they're absolutely critical to support clinicians like me, surgeons, oncologists, radiation oncologists, pediatricians who have an interest in cancer care, to help with to help with and support their time to help do this in Ireland. And just, I suppose, to talk about the importance of translational research, I'm going to bring you to the story of immunotherapy and immune checkpoint inhibitors. So our immune system, and this is meant to depict our immune system, protects us from lots of things, colds and flus and lots of illnesses that we get. But it doesn't seem to protect us from cancer. Now, there are cases of cancers disappearing. That's a separate thing. But in general, cancer grows because it's able to evade the immune system. So if you think about a cancer cell that's sitting here, and your immune cell is sitting on top of the cancer, sort of saying, what's this? Why are you here? And the cancer is able to communicate to the immune system, no, I'm okay, ignore me, I'm not a problem. And that's why cancer then is able to grow and the immune system ignores it. So we've found out the ways in which, with translational research and preclinical research, the ways in which the cancer cell is able to communicate that to the T cell. And now we can block that communication using drugs which are termed immunotherapy. So they basically start to reactivate the immune system. And this was such a breakthrough that in 2018, it was given the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine. And it was shared between Dr. James Allison and Dr. Tatsuto Honjo, who found two kind of separate targets or breaks that they call immune system breaks that then led to treatments that have revolutionized cancer care, would be fair to say. And now what we do is we have, we can tell the T cell, we can give the drug, the T cell now can approach the cancer cell, will attack it and destroy it because of these immune checkpoint inhibitors. Now, they don't work for everybody. And that's the next big question. And that's where I'm currently doing a lot of my focus in. And we're trying to figure out, why do these immune checkpoint inhibitors not work for everybody? And we're looking at the T cells, but also important, the B cells, which are another part of your immune system in blood, but also in the cancer specimen, and also interestingly in stool. And we're looking at that, and we're looking at it in cancer patients who are on immune checkpoint inhibitors. And these kind of studies would not be possible without the patients here in Cork for this study, but any patients that are involved in translational studies would not be possible without my collaborators and supports and the crazy intelligent scientists who do the preclinical work. The funders are also key for this. So when you do donate money to places, just when it is going translational research, this is the sort of things it's going into. I also am looking at small cell lung cancer and a nasty protein called MYC, which is upregulated in many cancers. And we're looking at it in small cell lung cancer, which is such a problem cancer to crack. We've really struggled to find new treatments for small cell lung cancer. And here you can see on the right hand side, patient 913, you can see MYC-L, lots more than it should have. And that's an upregulated treatment, and that will help us move forward with finding new treatments, especially MYC-focused treatments, which are currently in development, as well as identifying patients for clinical trials. So this translational research leads to clinical trial proposals, and I've recently pitched a study to the European Network of Gynecological Oncology Studies, which is blurred out. It's not your screen. I just haven't, it's not fully gone through all the legal stuff, so I can't show it at the moment. This is going to go through Cancer Trials Ireland with pharma industries and other partners who will be involved, but that takes a lot of work for this study to actually come to the patient. But we're really keen on pushing Irish-led studies in Europe and around the world that are really going to change practice for patients. So my final point is that I suppose cancer clinical trials are the best and the safest way of finding new and better treatments. They are really they're the backbone of how we can change cancer care. There's lots of different types and phases and types, and stages. And if you go speak to your oncologist, they'll explain what this, a certain study is, why it's suitable for you. For example, some of the phase 2 studies, they're not randomized. Everybody gets the investigational drug. There's no blinding or anything. So they're kind of studies that that will be explained to you. RCTs, cohort studies, that's how we change practice. On anything less than that, and we can't stand by it as better, because there's lots of reasons why, if you looked at 20 patients, why one group would do better than the other, for many different reasons, and not because of a single extra drug or because of a diet change or something along those lines. There's lots of myths around clinical trials that this week we've put a lot of work into trying to raise awareness, to try and make sure that people are aware that they're very safe, they don't cost money, patients will be getting their normal care, and information is available online. But talk to your oncologist, because they sometimes may have additional information. Translational research, if you get an opportunity to take part in it, absolutely do. It usually doesn't benefit you directly, but it can really answer important questions for the future. And just thank you for joining today, and for, I suppose, listening to me whitter on. And I'm really, as Rob said, I do love taking questions, so please feel free.
Great. Thanks very much, Dervla. That was a real whistle-stop tour, but you really managed to squeeze so much there into the few moments. Thanks very much for the engagement we've gotten from the audience there as well. So without further ado, I'll go over to some of those questions. I have a few myself, but we've already, I think, nearly five questions there. So we've a busy Q&A session. Good. So this is like mastermind now, Dervla. So your specialist topic, although I think one of them is directed at me, but your specialist topic now. So we're going to start you, and we'll be on the clock. So, so the first question, and a lot of these are anonymous. Great talk, Dervla, which I think we'd all agree with. Why do people have to go abroad for cancer trials? Why aren't they available in Ireland? Or maybe the question is, why aren't they all available in Ireland?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really good question. So there are lots of trials available in Ireland open, and it's quite dynamic. So there's trials changing. There's some trials opening, some trials closing. It's quite a dynamic process. In Ireland, there's about 50 studies open through Cancer Trials Ireland over all the different cancer groups, and there's another 25 children cancer clinical trials open. So we've got about 75 studies in Ireland. Now they don't fit everybody, and they don't suit everybody, and they're not available for every patient. So there are other studies that are, I suppose, available abroad, that some people can travel to. Now there's, I mean, you can get to clinical trials abroad, and we have sent patients to the Royal Marsden in particular, and that is possible to do. It is more onerous, obviously, but I mean, this is a conversation that you can have with your oncologist, or about what's available, because it's all the trials are usually available. This is clinicaltrials.gov, so you can actually check and see what's available. But I mean, we have a lot of choice, I suppose. The bottom line is we have a lot of stuff in Ireland. It's not, people don't have to travel for clinical trials. But if there was a trial that abroad that you were interested in, it is sometimes possible to support that.
Great, thanks very much. Second question is, does your doctor, this is a really good one, does your doctor, presumably GP, but maybe your oncologist, does your doctor have to tell you about relevant cancer trials, or are patients expected to ask and do their own research?
So I suppose, firstly, cancer trials should be just part of the conversation, and whether that's raised by your oncologist or raised by yourself, I suppose, as long as the conversation is raised. So I encourage everyone to sort of do their own research anyway, and come to me always with their queries. So I have patients who do their own research into diet, into over-the-counter medicines or complementary supplement, and I like to have that conversation open. I think an open conversation is essential, and we can go through the data and the research, and I actually really I love that sort of conversation. So I suppose the question is, your oncologist should be thinking of clinical trials for you. They probably are thinking of clinical trials for you. They may not mention it, but it may be at the back of their mind. But I think that both ways is important too, because it may be that you don't know that they're thinking about a trial, and it's more for your own information. Is there a clinical trial available? And they might say there's actually not. I actually looked this up before we met here today, and there's not a trial available. However, there might be this coming down the line, and I think it's just important to have those kind of two-way conversations.
So it'd probably be fair to say then that people should feel comfortable to bring it up, and that in many cases it will come into the conversation, but it does no harm for a patient or maybe their loved one that might be with them to kind of ask that question and see how they could be involved or contribute. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm the co-chair of the Gynae DSSG. So I get multiple text messages a week from oncologists all over the country who will ask me, do you have anything open or coming for ovarian cancer? Do you have anything coming for cervical? And equally, I would send a text message, is there anything for, for small cell lung cancer at the moment? I can't see anything on the cancer. I'm not aware of anything. Am I missing anything? So these kind of background contact, this is happening all the time. And maybe your oncologist may not let you know that it's happening, but they often are. So there's, and I get texts and emails. Interestingly, I've got an email I'm getting a lot of emails from the north, and I meant to say that with the Ireland as well. There is obviously cancer trials units in the north, and part of the All Ireland Cancer kind of research initiative, there's a lot of work to try and have the island of Ireland more accessible to everybody, no matter what side of the border you're on.
Great. Now, the next one is directed, I think, at me, although you may have some points as well, and you did kind of touch on it. How does the Irish Cancer Society support clinical trials? So very briefly, we use some of the donations that we get from the amazing people that do incredible things around the country. And bear in mind, an awful lot of the activity here is made possible by charities around the country, including the Irish Cancer Society. We support trials directly through an organisation called Cancer Trials Ireland, and Dervla mentioned those, and she's an important investigator within the team in Cancer Trials Ireland. So we physically put money in to enable those. And last year we put €1 million into the organisation, and we've been contributing ever since it was founded more than 20 years ago. But we also, very importantly, invest in some of the research leaders and the people who are developing and driving those trials as well. Amazing people. And I think anyone would be bowled away by the passion of Dervla, and Dervla represents cohorts of people all around the country who just want to make cancer better. That is our pleasure, and it's such an opportunity for us to kind of contribute behind that. So hopefully that answers that. The next question is from Roberta. Roberta, I hope you're well. Great to see you online here. We often interact on social media. Are there any plans to create trials looking at prevention in high-risk groups?
Yeah, so I suppose there are a lot of studies looking at prevention in high risk. So prevention and screening. I suppose there's two kind of studies that go on about high risk groups. There are studies. They're usually international studies. They need big groups and yeah, I suppose populations of patients. There's been studies looking at aspirin, for example, in patients at high risk of colorectal cancer and other types of cancers. So yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. Ireland is sometimes involved in them, sometimes it may not, but they usually are big international studies. And I know that Robert has a question to add, wants to add to that. Is that?
No, sorry. I'm trying to clear the list here, because they're coming in thick and fast here. I don't want to go back over old. No, I think you've answered that one, Dervla, that those trials are happening. They tend to be and require much larger groups, like the aspirin trial that you mentioned that has been ongoing. But I think to Roberta's point, I do think that is an area of further growth, because and the types of prevention trials and into the early intervention trials, which I think you're passionate around as well. I think many people and many clinicians recognize the potential opportunity for getting in earlier with the immune system too. So it's a burgeoning area, and one that we will need, because almost always the earlier we can get in, the better the outcome. So thanks for that one. Lisa has asked, very practical question. Do you have to be finished active treatment to be accepted onto a cancer trial?
So two things. First of all, you don't have to be finished active treatment to start talking about trials. And I think that's important, because what I think sometimes with clinical trials, you need some time to assimilate and see what's available and see what's right for you. So I think having the conversation about clinical trials shouldn't happen, when you're finished treatment and now you're kind of looking around for something. So clinical trials should be kind of part of conversations, like, especially when you're talking to your consultant, as in, well, what's next? Is there, what's your next plan for me? Because they should have a next plan for you. So if you're going on a clinical trial, the answer is if you're on active treatment and it's working, you shouldn't come off that treatment, because if you have treatment that is helping your cancer, you shouldn't stop something that we know is helping to go on to something that we don't know yet whether or not it will help. So if you're on a treatment that is maintaining your cancer, or is shrinking your cancer, or is whatever, then you should stay on that, and you should be thinking about clinical trials maybe for the future, but certainly not coming off a treatment. However, if it's, sometimes there's treatments that are put on that, you know, maybe aren't working very well. So maybe your doctor says, well, you know, the cancer is, you know, the treatment might be slowing down your cancer, but there's still a little bit of cancer growth. And at that point, you would be potentially eligible for a study if there was one that was suitable.
Okay, so the next one, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but maybe between the two of us, we can see if we do. So the question is, are decentralized trials helpful in cancer clinical trials? I think maybe that's doing them in more than one site, maybe, or be the way maybe I'd interpret that, multi-site trials versus, you know, single location, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. I think that it might mean that too. So I think that so two parts. The trial unit is a highly specialized unit. There's specialized staff, specialized everything. So usually the nurses and the data managers and the trial kind of coordinators are, and it's usually a big team of people. They don't work in other fields. They're very focused on clinical trials. So it's hard to have that degree of unit in every single hospital. However, equity of access is really important, and we're actually doing a lot of work down here in UCC, because a lot of us work over in Kerry as well, and we are currently trying to set up a sort of a satellite unit. It would be attached to the Cork unit, very much under the umbrella of Cork, but we would be able to do some of the simpler assessments, like a blood test that needs to be done on day 8, for example, after treatment. We could do that closer to the patient's home. And so there are sort of moves in place to try and do that for people, because otherwise, if you're coming from Dingle once a week, and some of these trials can be onerous with extra visits, and that's all for safety purposes, you know, it can take a bit, you know, it's tiring. So satellite units would be helpful, and we would like to set that up. But, you know, as I said, we have to do it safely, so that you know, patients wouldn't be getting some, you know, it has to be done properly.
Great. I can see 4 more questions. So just in terms of your own bandwidth and knowing there is an end in sight, and these are all coming from the audience. So people were clearly very engaged, Derv, and rightly so. So next one, is there any way of finding out how patients are doing on trials? There's one in particular that seems relevant to my mother with metastatic breast cancer, but would love to know how other parties are on the trial before I speak to her oncologist.
I don't. So first of all, there's not you can't find out exactly how different patients are doing on a study, and some of that, and that's predominantly because once a patient goes on study, the majority of all their data is anonymized, and that has to be because a lot of these studies are international, so information has to be sent to different countries, so it's all anonymous. Patients get a clinical trial number, so that there's no personal information sent anywhere outside of the hospital. So some studies you can read, I suppose, publications, posters that are available on the internet. So if you know the study name, you can usually put them into Google, and you might see some information. But they would be like, you know, out of the first 50 patients treated, we have this sort of response rate, we have this sort of, you know, result. And that might give you a guide. But I think that you should still have that conversation with the oncologist anyway. So I mean, for example, I would know how my studies are running, and if your oncologist, if it was my study, so I'm chief investigator of some of the studies in Ireland, and there's always a chief investigator in Ireland of the international studies, so one person in Ireland who kind of looks after the whole study in Ireland, even though it's not an Irish study, it's an international study, and they would have insights like that you're looking for, and we all know each other. There's only about 55 oncologists in the country, and we're all like, we all know each other, we all communicate frequently, we have lots of virtual meetings regularly. So I mean, they all have my number if it was me.
Yeah. So I think, kind of to summarize what you're saying there isn't a sort of a blow-by-blow account, and certainly not on a patient and individual perspective. But trials take many years, and at different times there will be outputs from it. So others, and particularly doctors, will be keeping an eye on this. Will see some of the outputs, so they'll say, there's a really exciting trial in a particular area, but we don't keep tabs at a distance on individual patients. Often, though, within units, doctors that are doing the trials, even as part of multinational, will have a sense of how things are going as well. Next one is a really good one, and one actually that allows me to bring up something that's close to my heart. So the question is, are clinical trials just for treatments of drugs, or can you do clinical trials for other things like nutrition, exercise? I'd add in surgery, radiation. I've seen cancer dentition studies and stuff like that. So I'll leave you to answer that one.
Yeah, great question, and a really important question, because I tend to lapse into the treatment or the drug trials, and I kind of talk about them. But absolutely, clinical trials test anything, so any sort of an intervention. So there's clinical trials are happening for nutrition, they're happening for exercise. There's a beautiful study happening here in Cork called the LISA trial, which is looking at intervention in the survivorship phase, and this is supported by the Women's Health Initiative, which is supported by, this is Irish Cancer Society trial. So patients are being randomized to different interventions, including nutrition, psychosocial, lots of different interventions versus not, and they will be able to see at the end of the day how much of an impact those sort of things have. And these studies are essential. On many levels, they're as good. Sometimes a drug can add only, an extra few months, let's say, but sometimes something as simple as getting patients to contact and tell you exactly what symptoms they have so you can manage them earlier, getting patients to exercise more, getting patients to give up smoking. Those can have as equally a good effect as a drug sometimes in patients' cancer outcome. So they're really essential and really key. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of studies looking at lots of different interventions, and they should continue, but they need to be tested in clinical trials, not on other levels. These, and that's where sometimes when I see some of the diet, recommendations, I don't see them a diet being done in a randomized controlled trial. It's very difficult to say it's that it's impossible to say that it has an impact. And I worry sometimes with these dairy-free diets, they're having a significant impact on patients' health and nutrition.
Yeah, I have to say I'd echo that, Dervla, and I would automatically turn away from anybody proposing dairy-free, just to say that, because I think we have to look at the longer-term health, particularly of women, and if they do well out of their cancer treatment, we don't want them having bone problems and that later on in their life. Go and talk to a dietitian. I would suggest to people, if they want to get good advice. And I know there's some fantastic cancer dietitians down on the Cork team as well. We'll say on that as well that that's a particular area, those kinds of studies, where I think it's really important that charities like ourselves can be involved. We don't have a drug to sell or develop, but these are really important things to answer. So they're not going to be of interest to a pharmaceutical company or a big tech company, but will be really important to patients and to clinicians. And that's partly why we support Cancer Trials Ireland and support excellent clinicians like Dervla to be able to do that work and do it in a neutral cancer way, rather than in a developing the next blockbuster drug, whatever. So last two. Second last one, again from Roberta. For healthy individuals who wish to support research by joining a trial as, say, a healthy controlled subject, is that possible, and how might they go about this?
I do not know the answer to this question, Roberta. I don't know, actually. If you so if I'm just thinking, so first of all, we don't have units in Ireland that are very sort of healthy volunteer. Well, I mean, we may, I don't know if we certainly don't in cancer trial units, but I don't know whether or not there are other methods through maybe the pharmaceutical industry where actually maybe you can volunteer to get drugs.
Yeah,
would you know, Rob?
I think in cancer is probably, because the diseases of cancer are more severe, in general, healthy human volunteers aren't usually used, and even the early stage trials that Dervla mentioned tend to be in advanced cancer patients, and occasionally, not always, but occasionally those patients may see some benefit even from that. Where healthy controls can come in, and some of those prevention studies and lifestyle studies that you mentioned, and usually there'll be some kind of maybe advert, and they might be looking for 1,000 people like that. But people can volunteer in other medicines and in other areas, and indeed in some of those other conditions, headaches, pain, migraine, and that it's actually not uncommon. But cancer is probably a more niche area, so hopefully that answers it. And I'm going to the last one there, which is just in the chat, so I had to kind of switch over there. So this is from Rachel, and she's very positive about the talk, Dervla. So she's a great session, very informative. She took part in a trial herself, and there's a big description along here, but very positive experience, highly recommends it, and she's been monitored for 10 years after that, which has been very positive for her. So her questions, and I have come across this myself, and I think it's important that we face this query. What happens if your oncologist is not actively involved in the area of trials and are offering you the standard of care? Can you be referred to another team elsewhere, or how does that work? She's had a experience of some friends who've experienced this, and they were offered regular treatment with no access to a trial, nor even to see if they were a suitable candidate for a trial. So, and maybe talk about some of that cross referral that I know you all do in the background as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, clinical trials should be part of treatment options if there's something available, and I suppose it's disappointing to see that you even if you were eligible, that someone would say, even if you were eligible for a study, that you wouldn't be able to offer it. So there's not clinical trial units in all the units, absolutely, in all the hospitals. So there are some hospitals that have no clinical trials, but referral within Ireland is an easy process, and that can be done by anyway. We're all happy to accept patients for clinical trials, for second opinions, for just a chat. That's our job. That's what we do. We're here to offer oncology opinions. So there is so second opinions are, they've become a kind of bread and butter. I've noticed lots of my patients ask me all the time, can they get a second opinion from someone else? And I actually encourage it on many levels, and often if I don't have something to offer someone, I don't have another treatment for them, I will say, would you like to have this conversation with with X, who actually is is one of the, I suppose, one of the leaders in this type of cancer in Ireland, and it's a very easy process to do, and can be recommended. And if you want a second opinion, you're entitled to it. So but referral to trial units are easy, and you don't have to, the oncologist looking after you can speak to the trial unit itself, or the investigator of the study, and just say, is this study suitable? Because there are in trials eligibility criteria, and there has to be very specific things that fulfill those eligibility criteria, and they're all safety checks that are in place to make sure nothing happens to people on the study. And sometimes they seem a bit rigid at times, but again, it is all in the name of safety. But so it may be that even if there may be no eligible studies, or there may be no suitable studies, or they may not be eligible for those studies that are open. So that's always a possibility. But second, if you're on in any way questioning your care, you're absolutely entitled to a second opinion and a discussion. And you'll be, actually most of the time, we're all, we've all been trained sort of the same level, so we would rarely disagree with each other's opinions, because most of my treatment is guidelines. We follow guidelines, we follow international gold standards, so we don't make it up.
Yeah, and maybe one of the things that maybe folks mightn't be aware of, because when they're in having that consultation, it's a very unique one-to-one kind of experience. But we've 9 national centres for cancer treatment, one in the children's area, and then 8 adults, and all of the other cancer treating hospitals come in under that sort of governance network. But if I went into you in your clinic today, say with a lung cancer, I'm getting your experience, but also the multidisciplinary team in the background. So you're the kind of the front end, and I would hopefully build that trust and that team and that relationship with you. But there's a massive team behind you. I know several of the great colleagues in Cork, and it's not just medical oncologists. It's a lot of other skills and that. So maybe just mention that, and that mightn't be a bad way for us to finish up. And maybe people don't fully appreciate that you're the front end of a much wider, very experienced team that can draw on lots of different things as well, and not just in the trial space.
Yeah, so I mean, every single cancer and every single patient is discussed at a multidisciplinary team meeting, and those rooms are filled with about 20 people, all from various aspects of a cancer. So Rob, you mentioned lung cancer, so you'd have the surgeons and the radiation doctors, the medical oncology doctors, you'd have the lung physicians. I mean, there's then you'd have all the nurses. The room is packed. So the the cases are looked at. Pathology, radiology, everything is discussed, and a decision and treatment decisions are made with the help of guidelines, but by the wider group. So when I sit down and I talk to you about your treatment plan, it wasn't just something that I came up with myself. It was something that was decided by a big group of I suppose experts on many different fields, and that is I suppose that's how we get to cancer treatment. So yeah, the multidisciplinary team meetings are absolutely, they're a key part of any cancer decisions. Sometimes as you're, with your oncologist, as you, as you move along, so that case then goes back to the multidisciplinary meeting multiple times to talk about radiation, to talk to the surgeons. So yeah, so there's a constant involvement with the bigger, wider team. And yeah, we might not always tell you that. That's the other thing. We don't always say, oh, well, we discussed this with X amount of people,
Yeah, no, and that's why I thought it was important to bring that point up, and people on the inside take this for granted, perhaps, and those on the outside, I think it can be reassuring to know that they have the whole weight of everybody, and sometimes those can even involve international colleagues in that as well who might consult. So time is upon us. We better get off the airwaves. We better let you get back to curing cancer. Really, really appreciate that, and I think folks will appreciate both the knowledge that Dr. Collins has brought to the topic, but the passion, the love, the desire to change, and it's people like Dervla that are making that difference, and it's our support, all of us coming together to do that. Tomorrow is International Clinical Trials Day. We're going to make it International Cancer Clinical Trials Day, I think. For those who are interested, Cancer Trials Ireland that we both mentioned there over the last hour have a great set of sessions actually in the RCSI tomorrow. Some of that is accessible on Zoom, or I'm not sure Zoom, but on a virtual platform anyway. So if you check out cancertrials.ie, their website, you'll see the details for that. Cancer, we know, always brings up challenges, and we said, so if you or someone you love has challenges or has other issues they want to discuss, please do get in contact with our support line. You'll get an answer there. You'll get a listening voice from someone highly experienced in cancer. So you can access them through our daffodil centres. There's a fantastic daffodil centres in the Cork hospitals, as well as around the country, or 1-800-200-700. Dervla, it's been such a tour de force. Really appreciate that. And thanks on behalf of our audience.
Thank you, Rob.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks all. Thank you, Rob. Thanks for the invitation.